I don't think there's a way to train for it, to be fair. It's just making sure you have the right mindset to go through the inevitable challenges you're going to face. I think you have to have reassurance that everything that you've planned, you can enact, so that you're not worrying about whether you've forgotten something or not trained enough. So that when you get to the start line, you just focus on putting one foot in front of the other.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the What It Takes podcast. I'm joined today by Nathan. Nathan, I'm very excited to talk to you. You're someone who is an incredibly inspiring figure. There was a lot that I learned about you from reading your book and really diving deep into your background. The one thing that really stood out that I think the audience is also going to be like, what? Is that you ran 27 marathons in 27 consecutive days across 27 countries, which is crazy. So I'm really excited to learn more about you and dive into your background and what it is that you do today. But first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks for the kind words. I appreciate being here.
Yeah. So Nathan, what do you do today for the audience? What are your businesses? What is your current focus today?
I've done a few things in my life and typically changed career and industry multiple times since graduating as a physical therapist many years ago. Today, I run a number of businesses related to sports events. The leader of a group of business coaches that work purely with CEOs. So we are executive and business coaches for CEOs through the brand Vista.
Amazing. And how did you end up starting these businesses? I mean, was it a coincidence? Did you plan it out? How did that come to be?
Well, I've always felt that if I was doing things I enjoyed and if I could monetize those things, then it wouldn't be work. So many years ago, where I'm from, also, we didn't have many off-road or cross-type events in nature. And I love nature, so I thought we need to organize a series of events to be able to appease that bug in me that wanted to be outdoors. So we started organizing events, which then, because we did them well, grew into a business that attracts people from all around the world. So it started from a hobby, and we monetized that passion for sports and the outdoors through that business. Yeah. Leadership training and development was something I was doing constantly as a CEO, where I led various businesses in tech and hospitality and education. And I used to love training my team and helping them develop as leaders. So when I left the rat race, it's something that I gravitated back towards because I enjoyed it. The last part really was something that I experienced as a CEO, with the loneliness that comes with the burden of leadership. And I joined a peer group, which was the Academy for Chief Executives at the time, which was an international organization. And I found solace in the fact that I had peers around me with wisdom. When I did leave the CEO role, I actually bought into the business, and now I run their expansion, besides obviously being a chair of those mini groups myself and working with chairs who are amazing people that want to give back and want to support, SME CEOs and founders. Right. So I spend a lot of my time at the moment on a plane, exploring new countries to plant the flag and start the businesses there.
Yeah, because your businesses are international. How many countries are you currently in?
So our main operation comes out of Malta, which is a small place. However, we have business in the UAE, in Iceland, expansion in the Gulf. But then obviously I'm lucky to be invited to speak at keynotes at conferences around the world. So I am lucky to be able to travel, on the 5 continents, to be able to talk to audiences about the stuff that I believe in. And that's great because it gives me an opportunity to expand my own mind.
Yeah, because that's one of the other things that was really cool about you, is that you do a lot of public speaking as well. You've even been on TEDx, right, which is a known one. How did you get into public speaking? I mean, were you invited, or just the first time and then you said, this is fun? Or did you seek it out? I mean, what was that like?
Many of my earlier years leading philanthropic organizations. So I was always outspoken in trying to raise awareness, raise funds, and generate interest in the activities we were doing. So having a public face for that was necessary. I also had some success in sports, where perhaps I was interviewed on TV or news stations or sports shows. So I got the education of speaking in public quite early. But then I realized that after the 27 marathons, which you mentioned, the appetite for people to hear my story and the correlations that you can use from using sports analogies with business is something that got me into the into the corporate sort of keynote speaking space where I attend conferences and talk about sort of the subject of mindset.
So it was really after that. And I can imagine that. I mean, I did see that it did attract news. I mean, you based a book on it as well, which is obviously a big thing. Now, going back a little bit to your early life, I mean, obviously the marathon, the 27 marathons was sort of like a crazy challenge. I mean, in your book, you mentioned how your wife also said, "Are you crazy?" Right. But doing that, one thing that you mentioned in the book, and what we also discussed in our first call, was asthma, right? Which you got at the age of 4. How were you able to do something like that with an asthma condition? Did that not hold you back in any way?
I think it actually helped. And it's a strange paradox, but having childhood asthma really taught me how to understand my internal workings and how my state of mind would affect my physiology. For example, if I'm anxious, I'm more likely to get an asthma attack. So feeling one coming on taught me how to calm myself down and deep breathe. So in a way, the asthma really helped me condition my internal state and allow me to be able to tap into that resource when I was under pressure, which then served me in situations where, again, you may be overly excited going into a negotiation or about to go up on stage and give a speech to 1,000 people. So those techniques are still used, but I use them on a regular basis. So I think in that sense, being asthmatic helped. I think what also helped was the fact that my lungs grew, let's say, abnormally large to be able to supply the amount of oxygen I needed.
Yes.
And obviously that helped because I have a very high VO2 max. Probably because of the asthma.
Yeah. And one thing that I think your parents, one of the things that they did is they didn't go down the traditional route where they said, we're just going to medicate him and not let him do sports. They pushed you, right, to do as much as possible and learn how to really live with it, right?
Yeah. I mean, for me, sports when I was a kid was therapy, so where other kids were doing it for fun, I needed to do sports. It was part of my self development and well-being. So I recall, situations where perhaps, I'd go down to training when we were a week or two away from exams, and I'd be the only student there, the only sort of player there, because everybody else was at home studying. And my parents would still make me go train, and then I'd have to catch up in the evenings because they knew that it was a lifeline for me.
And with the asthma, you said that you also really needed it, right, to push yourself. How did it shape your mental and really also physical resilience? Because obviously you're not doing it for fun, but you're also pushing yourself in a sense, right?
If you think about some of the techniques that people use today to improve endurance or VO2 performance, they restrict oxygen, so altitude training or breathing through masks. Or using airflow constrainers whilst training. These are all techniques that actually limit the amount of oxygen going into your system, which actually have a direct impact, like altitude training does, where we see athletes before big competitions go up to high altitude where there's less oxygen. So in a way, because I was asthmatic, I was getting that every breath I took, which actually helped. Obviously, it is a struggle at the time when you're a child and you might just run up the steps and get an asthma attack, which is quite scary, or be out camping and the pollen triggers an attack. So there were scary moments, but I think in general, it really helped me strengthen my physical endurance.
And I mean, because a lot of young people who struggle with something chronic, right? Asthma, it could be a bone thing, could be anything really. A lot of them allow that to define them, right? It's like, oh, I have this, and they limit themselves because of that. What's interesting about you is you did not allow it to limit yourself. You learned from it. How can you not limit yourself, but live with it and even excel in certain things? When it came to endurance, to hear someone doing 27 marathons, especially across 27 days, while they have asthma, they're like, is that possible? How does someone do that? For you, when did your journey start with endurance?
So I played basketball most of my younger life because it was an indoor sport, less dust, less triggers. So basketball was my reason for getting out of bed in the morning. I'd carry my basketball everywhere, and every minute I had, I'd shoot hoops.
Yeah.
I had some serious injuries. I played with the national team. I played internationally, at top level, professional level for many years, but then I had to stop because of knee injuries. And I recall doing my physio and doing a bit of running and a bit of swimming and a bit of cycling just to rehabilitate and keep fit. And then I said, look, I need some competition in my life. And I put those three things together and had a go at a triathlon, which I thoroughly enjoyed, although I probably came last. But I thoroughly enjoyed, and I figured that this was something I could probably put a bit more energy and effort into and have my sort of competitive bug fix, as it were, And I think by then as well, asthma wasn't really that predominant in my life. I had learned to live with it. Even today, I might feel tight-chested if I'm allergic to an animal or nuts or pollen or things like that, but it passes quickly. So I think my body and my immune system have adapted to it. So I wouldn't really say I'm a severe asthmatic in any way, shape or form. Took to triathlon as a way to let off steam and keep fit. And because it was 3 sports, for me, it was entertaining. So I missed that, but obviously it suited work as well because I could train around my working hours, so I could go out early morning or evening and not have to disappoint the team who are waiting for me to turn up for practice. So as an individual sport, it also fit my lifestyle. And that's really how I got into it. And then I started experimenting with longer and longer versions of triathlon, beyond Ironman and ultra triathlons, etc. And then I obviously started experimenting with longer swims, longer solo bike rides, and ultra marathons, 100-milers, and long runs, just to again experiment with sort of the limits of possibility and what lies beyond them.
Yeah, and why did you want to explore that? I mean, the limits, right, of possibility. What was the motivation behind that to pursue it? Where did that desire come from, or that interest?
I think there were 2 main ones. One was intrinsic, which was curiosity around how far the human being can exert itself. And the realization that mental strength makes such a difference on physical performance. So that was one. And I took a bit of a scientific approach to that to see, to quantify that. The other was extrinsic. I was mostly doing these challenges for charity. And the more extreme they were, the more media attention we got, which meant the more money we raised. So always pushing the boundaries and getting that attention allowed us to raise more and more money for the causes I believed in. So 2 reasons.
Yeah, it's interesting. I also read that you, it was in your book as well, Marathon de Sables, right? Which is through the desert. My mom actually did that as well. That's why I was like, oh, you did that too? That's cool. What was that like for you? I mean, because it's 5 days, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, something like that. And then you run a marathon or 2 a day. So it's 200 something kilometers in total.
Yes, the one I did was the 25th anniversary, so they made it slightly longer at 250 kilometers. Marathon des Sables is interesting because it's not necessarily, again, about the physicality of running. It's primarily the planning. So you have to carry everything that you take with you on your back. So you have, especially if you're doing the first time, carrying too much weight. The planning part was key. And then the terrain, the environment. You're living in a country typically where you're training in much milder conditions, and then you're going up and you're running in 50 degrees Celsius of heat on sand. And it's a completely different physiology, different dynamic, different hydration needs, different levels of sweating, chafing, soreness. All these things come into play. So you may very well be able to run 250 kilometers in 5 days, on a road. Yeah. But can you do it in a desert with a backpack that weighs 12 kilos is a different story.
Yeah, because a lot of it is the terrain, I can imagine. I mean, I actually just got a knee injury because I was running on very slippery terrain. And so how I landed was very different from typical road. And then all of a sudden I felt this ache in my knee after like 15 kilometers. Desert is also a little bit on the same side where it's the landing, how your feet are, because it dampens it a little bit, right? So you have to almost use more force to more energy.
You have to change your running technique when you're running on sand, in the sense that you want to stay flat-footed. So you have a larger surface area that hits the surface of the sand, so you sink down less. If you look at the Moroccan runners who win this race year in, year out, they have a very different style of running than they would if they were running on asphalt.
So it's really about the style. How do you train for that then? I mean, obviously you don't have like someone in Norway or in a typical European country, they don't have a lot of sand to run on, right? I mean, you can go to the beach, but how does one train for that?
Well, I don't think there's a way to train for it, to be fair. I mean, yes, you can go and run on the beach just to see how it feels, but frankly, it's just making sure you have the right mindset to go through the inevitable challenges you're going to face. I think you have to have reassurance that everything that you've planned, you can enact, so that you're not worrying about whether you've forgotten something or not trained enough, so that when you get to the start line, you just focus on putting one foot in front of the other. I think the biggest problem here, if we think of expeditions and adventures, is there's always going to be something that goes wrong. And you need to be prepared mentally, and you need to also be prepared from a management perspective of, do you have the right equipment, support, resources to be able to deal with the situation that as it happens and as it unfolds. And that's key. If you panic, if you go expecting everything to work perfectly because that's how you planned it, that's not going to work.
There's always going to be like these challenges that come along. And when it comes to these challenges, obviously, it's often that voice inside of your head that tells you to stop, tells you, no, you shouldn't do this, or kind of wants to hold you back. How do you approach that little voice in your head when that moment comes on? And this doesn't have to be in exercise or endurance or anything like that. It could be business, it could be personal relationships. But when you get that voice that tells you this is scary or you can't keep going, how do you talk? How do you manage that voice? I mean, how do you want to do it, but it's painful, right? It's scary, it can be whatever. How do you approach communicating with that part of you or that voice inside of your head?
Look, I think the first instance, and having sort of made mistakes in the past with it, is that you don't listen to it early enough. You wait for it to get too loud. And then it can be very convincing when it asks you to stop. So I think, having that conversation with yourself earlier in time allows you to be able to discern what the voice is actually saying. Because then when it's too far gone, when you're panicked or when you're overwhelmed, then obviously it's very, very difficult to reason through that. And I think, we all have various selves, as it were. We have our alter egos. We have the diehard that wants to go out and break records and push the boundaries. And then we have the one that wants to play. There's the other one that's in between, being the judge and the referee. And I need to recognize those different voices. It's not necessarily one voice. Different ones pop up in different situations. They're saboteurs that come into play depending on our experience, our resilience, and the situation as it unfolds around us.
So really, one key thing here is also, like what I'm hearing, try and address it as early as possible, right? So when it kind of starts to creep in, you get signs of that voice and you deal with it immediately. And you say, hey, I can do this. I got this. Don't push it too long, essentially.
Yes, but you also need to pay heed, because the voice may be true, and maybe there is a time to stop. Maybe there is a time where you need to back off. And that's why we need to practice with this voice. You don't go out and do a life-threatening expedition without having done practice.
Of course.
And the voice pops up.
So there is that, you need that balance. Absolutely. And one thing, when it comes to this mindset is, and this is what I really want to dive into now, which is the FIRE model. How did you come up with that? How did you, where did this come from? Which is flow, right? You have impact, you have roles, and then you have excellence or excelling. Where did this come from? This is, I believe, yours. You kind of came up with this, right?
I think for me, it's, the last sort of 15 years have been uplifting and enlightening to spend time with high performers, whether they were athletes or CEOs or individuals, artists, musicians, people at the top of their game. And I was always curious to see what they do differently. What could I take from them to put into my life? And how can I mirror that and collect that information and share it with other young leaders and CEOs who are maybe growing their business or trying to achieve something in life. And when I distilled that content down, and you see that they obviously have the obvious things like, the good habits and the discipline and the commitment and the purpose. These were all written about in various books, from The Power of Why of Simon Sinek to Ikigai, on purpose, to, the Atomic Habits, James Clear. These were for me sort of obvious to a sense that, they were common knowledge. So I wanted to dig a little deeper and see whether there were other things that basically layered onto each other. And so the FIRE model really thinks about stacking various elements in your life that will actually make life more purposeful and meaningful, less stressful, and bring the best out of you. Whilst you may have very good habits, but perhaps your purpose doesn't align with what you're trying to achieve, then you're going to struggle. You may have a very strong purpose, but you have no discipline, and therefore you're going to struggle. So with the FIRE model, what we wanted to try and figure out is, are there elements that ring true collectively to raise your game?
Yes.
And so what we found is that high performers spend more time in flow. Flow is this being in the zone. Yeah. And so the more prevalence we see of flow state in individuals, typically they are higher performers. I think what's also clear with this busyness that we have in life is that the high performers are very specific about their role.
Yes.
And they understand what their purpose is and why they accept things with the clarity of mind that it's something they can live up to as a responsibility. So again, high performers typically are very good at switching their self to suit the moment at hand. Whether it's the risk taker in business or the team builder, those are two roles that care about which one they are at any given time is key. So self-awareness in that space. Impact, really about sort of value creation. We often think about measuring our performance in time. We talk about work-life balance as a time thing. I should spend more time with my kids, or I should spend more time, taking care of my health, or I should more spend time answering emails or going to work. Time is a very unreliable measure of performance. You can do a lot with a little time, and you can do a little with a lot of time. So impact really is around the return on time. So high performers typically are doing things in their day where they're getting much more than other people. All of this towards becoming excellent. So there's always this sort of discerning approach of, can I do this better? Even if things are working, they don't settle for good enough. They talk about making things better constantly, not necessarily even measurable things, but even behaviors. Can I look at being in more flow? Can I find ways to be a better role model? Can I find ways to make more impact? So it's this constant improvement.
Yes.
Japanese talk about Kaizen. So stacking these four areas on top of each other really creates a powerful state of play for individuals who are wanting to raise their game.
That's very interesting. Yes.
And we found that we've tested it, even asking questions to people who we think are high performers. And typically they tick those 4 boxes.
Yeah. How do you get into flow state? I mean, you mentioned that was being in the zone. How does one get into that? How do you enter that flow state?
So if you look at the work of Csikszentmihalyi, who came up with the term, he talked about intense focus, avoiding flow blockers, which could be, for example, distraction and anxiety, and boredom. So it's the sweet spot in between all of that. Then Kotler and Wheel studied extreme athletes, and they looked at what they're doing to be completely focused in the moment, where obviously they're in life or death situations often, tightrope walking across, the Twin Towers type of situation where you can't be distracted. You have to be absolutely 100% focused. And again, these are flow state experiences. So again, what they found is that there are environmental triggers, there are risk triggers. So all of these aligned tend to enhance the chance of getting into flow. There's no flip the switch and get into flow. That doesn't work. But you can engineer flow in your life by looking at the things that would enhance flow or reduce the things that would block flow.
One example that you had in the book was the swim teacher, right, who loved what he was doing. He trained your kids as well. And then you looked at him and said, well, he's doing so great here. And you promoted him to be a principal or director of the school, whatever. And then as a consequence, he was doing things that were not within his flow state. So he was in an area where he did not have that level of competence, and it was new to him. That kind of, he never got into that level of flow, and he later ended up, was it quitting? Right. And so it's like, and you mentioned that you learned from that, right? Whereas you took responsibility and you said, well, I shouldn't have promoted him in the first place. I should have let him do what he did. But essentially that example right there is a little bit of a testament, that statement, to the environment that he was in, he was really good at this, and he stayed there, right? And I think for him, because the thing that I want to get to here is he wasn't aware, right? He didn't realize that that new position was going to take him out of that flow. You saw it later at a later point. How can someone then identify whether or not, like, it's like, okay, here I am in flow state. This is like, how does one approach that? How does one figure out that these are the things that make me, how do you, it's that the level of awareness that I think is so important there, right? Because you mentioned you could engineer it, but if it's kind of like by chance or coincidence, like how do you
There's for me, if I think about flow within my day and how I help people get into it, you should think about flow as a channel of performance. On one hand, you have a vertical, which is the challenges that you accept. And on the other one, you have the skill set that you adopt. Okay, so we're going challenge versus skills. Now, for you to be in flow, you need to have somewhere in between that you're growing at the same time as your skills are improving, you're taking on more and more challenges. If you take on challenges that are beyond your skill set, you move into anxiety. If you don't take on challenges as your skill set, you move into boredom. So the sweet spot, the channel for flow, the flow channel really is bouncing in the space between anxiety and boredom, which could also be seen as the touching point of excitement.
Yeah.
So when you go, everything's in control. If you're feeling anxious and you're not growing into that particular responsibility or challenge, then you move into anxiety and you block flow. So flow is the sweet spot between stress and comfort zone. And we call that the pressure zone. Yeah. So you want to be under pressure. But if it goes too far, then you get deer in the headlights, you get anxiety. So if someone is doing a role where there is pressure, but they're thriving in that pressure, then they're finding their flow state. If that pressure becomes anxiety because they can't cope, because they don't have the skill, because the demands on them are way beyond their level of competence, then they're going to move into anxiety and they're going to freeze.
Yeah, so in order to get to that state, you have to be connected to your feelings, right? To know when.
Yes, because if we think about the FIRE model in whole, one of the areas of roles and responsibilities, again, is calibrating that according to your skill set. We often bite off more than we can chew, maybe because we want to impress or because of our ego, or we say no because we want to stay comfortable to roles and responsibilities that, would potentially sort of stimulate us to be able to get into flow. So they're aligned as well there. It's also the impact, the instant gratification. When I'm working with a time and instructor and I can see that.
Yeah.
I don't, so I'm not making impact. I can't feel it before it's going to flow. To my point, I can't just have impact excellence work and combined to make a significant of the state of play that you are into to get to your best.
Yeah. 1 second here. I lost half of what you just said due to the static. So let me just take a note. 33 minutes. I'm just going to, again, quickly pause here now. Have you had this experience before because this is my first time experiencing this, and I'm just curious, maybe it's your headphones? Do you know?
It could be. I can swap them around.
If you
I'm
can
not hearing
try
it,
that.
but I can. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, if you can try it. Okay, there we go. Let's see. Say something now. Yeah, okay, I can hear you. It's a little low. Yeah. Yeah, I don't hear you very well now. Like, it's very background. Like, it sounds like your audio is very far away. It's okay if you leave and join again. Try that. Yeah, it still sounds very far away from the microphone. So I don't hear the static anymore. So I think it might have been the headset that you used. What if you, it's a little bit better. I see that within here, does it say that you can switch mics, or do we have to stop recording within the, okay, try to leave the room and rejoin, and then it will continue, because we can always edit the two segments together. That's not an issue. So I'll stop. How does a person know when they are in flow state, right? I mean, they need to have a good understanding of their emotions, right? When they're in that zone of too much stress and skill level, they need to have an overview of that. And someone who may not be very deep into this, how can they figure out that balance? How do they, do they need that level of emotional understanding to figure out if they're in flow state?
I think, if you're not familiar with the jargon of flow state and what it means, from an academic perspective, obviously you need to learn how it works. However, their work is stressful. The relationships they have are always touch and go.
Yeah.
Things aren't working in their life. Clearly, they're not getting enough flow state, because flow only happens when things are working.
Yes.
Now, what most people do is they fall into flow state by accident because they're doing something they love and they get into it, whether that's, running or cycling or playing a musical instrument. And they say, I lose myself when I'm doing that thing.
Yes.
So you typically pick something like that and go, okay, so that's what flow state feels like. Now, would you like to get more of it? And they go, yeah, absolutely. I know, I completely immerse myself in it. I'm lost to the music or the activity, whether it's art or sports. And then you take that and you say, okay, so now let's peel that and let's figure out how you can get more of that in other aspects of life, whether you're washing the dishes or running a meeting at work or doing your hobbies. And that's really how you enter the conversation, because it's difficult to understand it unless you felt it.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've definitely had it within, 2 areas really stick out. And that is the social aspect, when I can really utilize all my social skills to achieve an objective. It has to be tied to an objective. I can't, not just for the purpose of not doing anything, just being social, but there has to be a goal that can be attained through social tactics and strategies. I'm so in the zone. And the other is running. And these are the two that I've really identified that I lose myself in it. But, because as a coach, obviously you're coaching people to improve themselves and hit their goals. When it comes to coaching, do you help them achieve fire? Do you flow, impact? Do you coach them towards that, or what kind of frameworks do you use when coaching?
So typically we'll use it as a bit of a diagnostic tool. So we'll ask questions around that, open question, probing questions, to figure out if any of those four are missing, or perhaps some of them may be diluted, or maybe there's a focus on one of those areas, but not on the others, and we try and create a bit of balance. So for us, when we think about balance, we think about those four areas being balanced rather than this tug of war between work and life.
Right.
Because you can get flow at work and you can get flow doing pastimes, and the same with the rest. I can live my best self in my role model as a leader or as an executive, but I can also do that as a parent and be my best self with my children, or as a son to my parents, or as a best friend. When we're enacting those roles well in life, then there's no stress about work versus life. It's life when you've got all those four. So we use it as a diagnostic and find out what's missing, and then typically we coach towards fulfilling that particular area of weakness.
So that's the diagnostic, and then obviously once you've figured out what's lacking, what's there, what's not, you work towards the most important area to get them up there. What is one thing that from your experience that most individuals struggle with that you coach? Is there one area that they find the hardest, or for you when you coach, is there one particular area that is harder than others to achieve, to attain when it comes to the FIRE model?
There's a range, I guess, but if I had to pick one thing, I would say with high performers, it's imposter syndrome. It's second themselves all the time, and that holds them back. So I think a level of self-belief is key for someone take risks, and you need to be able to take risks to exit the comfort zone and perform. A healthy level of imposter syndrome stops your ego and stops you being cocky. So I think it's healthy, but if it becomes too much, it causes you to start questioning everything you do, every decision you take, and every action you take, and that's not helpful.
That level of imposter syndrome. I mean, I understand that self-belief is very important, and having that level of belief in yourself without feeling like you're overstepping, right? But like in a situation where you are right, because I think this is something that I've experienced as well, where whether it's someone else or it's me, where you have the answers, or that this path forward is the right thing to do, and someone else is fully disagreeing with you. How do you approach that conflict of knowing that you're right and they're wrong? Or if you can understand, like,
I think personality comes in here. Second to that is the trust between those two parties. So let's take the typical example of an athlete with their coach. The athlete might think that this is the way I should swing a golf club or do a freestyle stroke in the pool. And the coach might say, no, actually, you need to change that. Unless there is trust, then you're going to get conflict. Now, at the same time, once you've considered all options, going with what you think is the right thing is important, because it's makes you accountable for that decision. If you take someone's idea and it doesn't work, then you blame them. But if you've chosen your idea to follow through, then it's on you. So you can take responsibility fully.
Yes, responsibility is a good one. And how has that FIRE model helped you when it came to the 27 marathons in 27 consecutive days across 27 countries? Actually, I want to start with this. Why did you want to do it? Like, what made you want to do that? What was the motivation behind it? Because it's such an insane thing to do, right?
It was the European Year of Volunteering, and I was responsible, working with a government project to try and promote volunteering across the EU, 27 EU states at the time. And one of the things I wanted to create was a campaign around using our talent to be able to help others. And in my case, I said, well, if I have a talent of endurance, I'll find somehow to use that and use it as an example. And we encouraged other people to use their own talents to help others, whether they would teach music to vulnerable children or organize activities for kids who maybe lost their path, or somehow use sports as a way to encourage people to volunteer. And so what we did is we planned the idea of running the official marathon. That means that I would only be away from work for a month, and it would be our first ever. Since then, people have done more than 27 in different countries, back to back. So I think it was interesting because it was the first time that someone had done something like that. And since then, people have gone beyond. But the interesting thing for me was the engagement of people on the ground. So we bootstrapped the campaign on social media to say that I would be running the official route. And if anyone wanted to join, they could come and run for as long as they wanted to and leave a donation to charity. And that would be that. And lots of people turned up, and they all ran different distances. They gave their charitable donation and raised quite a bit of money. But it was great because I never ran alone. I was always in company.
When you did run, you spoke about certain challenges that you came across, right? I think you spoke about a knee injury or something with your foot. I think first, was it in Paris or one of the first couple of races that you were going through? And you still had a lot to finish, right? A lot to do. How did you overcome that challenge mentally?
Well, at first, I just sort of said, you know what, the worst case scenario is I'll end up walking the rest of the marathons. But I will get to the finish line come what may. So I already have that sense of, I just have to recalibrate what it means to finish the marathon running versus walking. You're still finishing it.
Yeah.
Trying to avoid the pain. So I had torn a muscle in my leg, and I was sort of trying to make sure I didn't put too much pressure on that particular muscle, and redistribute my weight more effectively. And I obviously did the tape and the strapping and took the anti-inflammatories to be able to cope with the discomfort. Interestingly enough, though, within 4 or 5 marathons, the muscle actually healed instead of got worse, which was quite remarkable. And again, I come from a medical background, and I was baffled by the fact that this muscle actually healed itself rather than continue to get inflamed and tear even further.
Yeah, that's incredible. Do you believe in any higher powers?
In this case, I don't think it was higher power. I think it was the fact that the body has functional healing.
Dude.
Yeah. So even when I was a physiotherapist, when I would work with patients to go back to normal movement as quickly as possible, we would see accelerated healing every single time.
Yeah.
So if someone sprained an ankle, whereas previously they were told, sit with your foot up for weeks on end, I would get them to go into a pool where they're lifted off their weight and walk as normally as possible. So the body has an amazing ability to heal itself if it's working within its functional and focusing on contact with the ground, probably sort of reduced the pressure on those different muscles and allowed other muscles to take over while it healed.
And then towards the end of the 27 days, how did you feel? Like, what was going through your head when you crossed that last finish line?
Well, the first thing you think is, I can go home now. Because obviously being away for so long was tiring emotionally as well. Satisfaction, obviously, of having completed something nobody else had done before on the planet. Looking back at the money we had raised and the awareness we created through the social media campaigns, that was extremely gratifying in that we made a difference there. Very grateful to the team that supported, whether it was, the guy driving the camper van or my friend on the bike showing who I was following through the routes to make sure I stuck to the official distance. People at home which were supporting the campaign through the marketing. And obviously my wife who was supporting me by taking care of the kids for a whole month on her own. So mostly grateful for the fact that I had the right people around me that enabled me to do it. Yeah,
I can imagine that. And I want to focus a little bit more on your businesses, Nathan. Obviously, you're an entrepreneur today. You're doing quite a lot of different things as well. What is your vision for your businesses? What do you hope, what drives you in terms of your overarching goal? Like, why do you do what you do? And where do you want to go?
So for me, it's extremely clear. Our goal is to help people achieve their best self. And with the sports events, it's basically challenging themselves to run longer distances, to be able to experiment with their physical and mental capacities and pushing beyond pain and discovering, strengths they didn't know they had, which gives them confidence then to apply that in life and work. Obviously, these leaders are making better decisions. They are more impactful positively on their employees and their employees' families, the communities within which they operate. So I think there's a transcendence of what we're trying to do with the leaders who then go out and make the world a better place. And that is why we do what we do.
It does, like you say, create that ripple effect, right? Like when you impact one person's life who's responsible as well who has a lot of responsibility, but through that you're able to impact millions and millions of lives, right? And this vision that you have, is this and the work that you're doing, I assume it's also close to you personally in terms of your values, what you stand for. What are some of your values?
I think they change to a certain extent in different situations. For me, it's waking up every morning and knowing that you're making an impact, that you're living up to your roles and responsibilities, that I enjoy being in flow and lose myself in the activities I enjoy doing, whether that's sports or endurance or speaking, and always having a critical eye on what we're doing and saying, can we be better? So it sums up our belief systems as well as our methodologies.
Yes. When it comes to identifying your values, let's say someone who struggles with figuring out what their values are, how can one find those?
Well, I think there are tools you can experiment with. Finding some quiet time, being alone, thinking about your things that you feel grateful for. Those might indicate what your values are. Think about where you have regrets or where you've beaten yourself up. Those might be counter values that you need to perhaps unravel, and think about aspirations. And again, those might be in line with values stand for.
And one other thing that you spoke about previously, but also in your book, was work-life balance, right? The top performers, they're able to switch off when they're not doing a thing. And I there was a podcast as well between, I think it was Huberman and I don't remember his name, but he was a chess prodigy when he was young, and he also went on to do some martial arts. And he spoke about MIQ, most important question. Now, one of the things that he discussed was is this ability to switch off when you're not doing things, right? But in your book, you also expanded on the fact that when you're not, you shouldn't always be working, right? You shouldn't always, because a top performer is able to dedicate focus time on a specific task and then switch off and then focus on something else, which is the balance, like life, as you spoke about and mentioned. How do you manage being, a father, a husband, an entrepreneur, all the different roles that you have, how do you approach that, right? Because I think a lot of people who go through life, they might, oh, work is so stressful right now, and then they start giving up. And I can relate to that. I used to work a lot of hours. I got better on focusing more on what's the most high leverage thing that I can work on. And so instead of working 10, 12-hour days every single day, even on the weekends, I now do 8 to 10, and I take a Sunday off. And I focus on nurturing myself, being social, doing things that I love. But how can someone then, go to the point where they know that? How do you balance that?
Well, I think you gave the answer when you talked about focusing your time and energy on one thing, because you know that you can make more of an impact if you're doing that one thing well, rather than trying to spin too many plates and dropping things. So making sure that you say no to the things that don't add value or don't add impact, and focusing on the things that do. For me, that requires some discipline to be able to say no. I recommend a not to-do list to everyone, to put things there that you think that currently you have to do, but perhaps are draining your energy, and you need to move them across from your to-do list. So really sort of paying attention to where you add value and where you make an impact is key. And I think also the physiological limits that we have within our energy levels and brains to be able to stay focused, frankly, going beyond 8 hours is going to just drain my energy. So the last 2 hours of my 10-hour day are not going to be very productive.
Right.
And therefore you're better off stopping and going off and doing something else that's going to allow you to recharge your energy.
Yeah.
So, these are obvious, but unfortunately, most people don't necessarily notice because they're full of cortisol from the stress and they don't see the wood for trees.
Yes.
So it's taking time off to reflect on whether things are working or not, and really focusing on where you add value and where you make an impact. Accepting responsibility, which is just, I think we don't perhaps appreciate all the roles that we have. If I ask people what the roles are, they give me a work role and they give me a home role. Even at work, we've got 10 roles, we're a leader, we're a coach, we're a follower, we're a colleague, we're an employee, we're an investor, we're someone that takes initiative. These are all different roles, and we need to understand that those things play different parts. So I think for me, to sum it up, it's really around focusing on where I can make an impact, and that may be a half an hour chat with my rather than spending the whole day with them while my mind is wondering about all the emails I've got to answer.
Yeah. It's embracing all those different roles, right? That you have a sister, brother, father, work, where you mentioned that you do have many different roles there as well.
And we need to navigate that, and I'll make up for it when things settle down again.
Yes.
And so you might say, well, that's not very good work-life balance. Perhaps for those 3 weeks it isn't. However, in the grand scheme of things in life, having those seasons is fine, as long as the people around you that depend on you are clear about your roles and responsibilities within that period of time. So
right.
It goes back to the same principle of what is my role now? And if my role now is to reorganize the business because our family income depends on it, and that's going to take me 14-hour days, so be it. So yeah, I think this is important, because we often mistake hard work for outputs, and hard work and outputs are not necessarily related.
True. That requires also good communication, right? Letting those people know that this is the season that you're in. Because a lot of the times, I'll meet someone and they're just switched off socially, and I sometimes I wonder, well, what's going on? Is something wrong? And it's just that they're just so locked in, or they have this is the thing. And once you understand that, it's like, oh, okay, no problem. Do you, right? But it's that communication that I think is so important, to let those who you have a role to, you let them know. And what is one, or I'll phrase it differently. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned throughout your life up until this point that you think is important for others to hear?
Oh, well, we could write another book about all those. Because they all relate to failure. It's making mistakes and learning from mistakes.
Yes.
Even with the best intentions, things don't always work out the way you plan, and you build resilience from those mistakes, and you learn from them, and you try and become better next time. So, things biting off more than I can chew, following my ego and trying to make an impression, thinking of myself beyond my competencies, understanding that we need to live in the moment as well as we need to plan in the future and learn from the past. Being in the moment is key. So you can sit here thinking about all the things you want to achieve and not do anything about them today, or regret all the things you've missed and not do anything to replace those things you've missed.
Yeah.
So I think, for me, often when I find myself stressed out, it's because I'm not being in the moment. I'm not being my best self now, which may be stop working, go for a run, maybe knuckle down and clear your inbox.
Yeah.
But just being in the moment, I think, is something that I constantly need to remind myself, because my mind wanders about new things we can do and new ideas I've got, which isn't always helpful.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And final question for you, Nathan. If there is one piece or whatever, however many you want to give to an aspiring entrepreneur, someone who's an ambitious person who wants to achieve something, and it doesn't have to be ambitious, on a world level scale, but could even be personal thing, what would you tell them?
Surround yourself with remarkable people, because that wisdom rubs off on you. And choose those people in a way that they reflect your best version of yourself, people you'd like to be like, or people who have traits that you value.
Amazing. Nathan, thank you so much for joining today. At a real blast, pleasure as well, to learn about you and your story and the lessons that you've learned along the way. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.